Cloud. Okay, here we go. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first in a series of three Lease and Learns housing workshops hosted by the University of Houston Downtown Basic Needs Center and presented by Monique Abioye, right?
Abioye. Abioye.
Abioye,
There you go.
apartment locator and realtor here in Houston. Today's workshop is Renting 101. The presentation will be followed by Q&A. Type your questions in the chat, or at the end, we may open up the mics for everyone to chime in. Welcome, Miss Monique.
Thank you, Cynthia. And hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Renting 101. As Cynthia mentioned, it is the first in a three-part series, which we are calling the Lease and Learn Housing Workshops. So I'll just share my screen with you all so that you can see the presentation that I prepared for you and the topics that we're going to be covering today. So first up, we're going to go over roommates. When do you need one? Who should you be rooming with? How to make that situation a comfortable one for all parties involved. So we'll be talking about all of those things. We'll also review housing options, so that way you can decide which type of housing is best suited to your situation. We will also do a deep dive into financials because there are more monies involved besides the monthly rent. And I want you guys to have a very good understanding of the true total cost of renting an apartment. We will also take a moment to review locations. So in essence, we will break down how to narrow down your neighborhood options, kind of tailor it to your wants and needs. We'll also take just a moment to review safety tips because I do want everyone to keep safe no matter where it is they decide to live. After that, I do have a couple of tips I'd love for you to consider ahead of your apartment search. And then finally, I'll share just a couple of resources that'll be available to you should you decide you want to take advantage of those. All right, but before we get into that, just a bit more about me and my background. We're going to start with roommates. When do you need one? Who should you be looking to join you in your housing, or how to make that process a smooth one? So we'll talk through all the nuts and bolts of that. We'll also talk about housing options. Okay, so that way you can choose between the different options out there and see which one is the best fit for you and your situation. We will also look at the total cost of renting an apartment because there's a lot of financials involved beyond just that monthly rent. So we're going to take a deep dive into that and look at the financials. Then we'll move on to locations and discuss where you might want to live, how to narrow down those neighborhood options, and also just a real quick tips on how to keep safe wherever it is you decide you want to live. After that, I do have a couple of tips I'd love you to consider ahead of your apartment search. And then finally, I will share some resources that are available to you should you decide you want to take advantage of those. But before we get started on those, before we get started on those things, I'd like to share just a little bit more about myself and my background. As Cynthia said, my name is Monique Abioye, and you guys know me as a Houston-based apartment locator and realtor. But before there was real estate, there was U of H. I graduated from the main campus in the early 2000s, and I returned some years later to work as an academic advisor for about 5 years. And prior to advising, I also worked in collegiate admissions and recruitment. So I do have a good understanding of what students are looking for and the challenges they're facing when they're seeking off-campus housing options, which is why I'm combining now my higher education background with my real estate experience to work with students but in a slightly new capacity. Now I'm focused on helping them to find the housing options that fit their needs, their preferences, and their budget. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into our first topic. Okay, that again is roommates. So when do you need a roommate? There are a lot of reasons to seek one out, but the number one reason I've seen in working with clients is because maybe you don't meet the income requirement on your own and need a little support in that area. So I do want to take just a half a step back and explain what is an income requirement. Now, the income requirement is the amount of money that you need to earn per month in order to qualify for a unit. Okay, generally speaking, most complexes are going to ask you to make 2 to 3 times the monthly rent to qualify. And so I want to share a really simple example just to help you visualize what I mean. So let's pretend, emphasis on pretend, that we found an amazing apartment for only $100 per month. Right? If they are requiring you to earn 2 times the rent, then you need to bring in $200 per month to qualify. If they require you to make 2.5 times the rent, then you need to make $250 per month. And if you are required to make 3 times the rent, then you guessed it, that's $300 a month. So you can adjust the math to fit with the numbers that you're working with. But again, that income requirement is generally 2 to 3 times the monthly rent. Now, if you find that there is a shortfall, like the apartment you want costs a certain amount, but the amount that you make is a little bit under that, maybe a roommate is the right solution for you, or maybe multiple roommates. It just depends. It's situational. Because every adult ages 18 and over will have their income count towards that total that the complex is looking for. Now, you may prefer to have a roommate for other reasons as well, like whether that be social or romantic or safety reasons or what have you. But again, the primary reason that I see is because people are just trying to make it a little bit more affordable to be able to move out on their own. There are other ways to make up that shortfall as well if you find that you're a little bit short, and we will touch on that in just a few minutes. But for now, I just wanted to highlight the financial benefit to, being able to bring in a roommate. Next, let's talk about who it is you should be rooming with. Okay, so for anyone who's living on campus somewhere, they're going to be a little more restricted in terms of who their options are, because most likely they will have to room with people who are also students at the same university, whereas with a commuter school like UHD, if you're looking to live off campus somewhere, so you're not bound by those same restrictions, you can room with whomever you'd like. So of course, a go-to option for most people are friends, right? So that can be friends that go to school with you, friends that go to a different school, or friends that don't go to school at all, right? Again, no restrictions, anybody you'd like. However, I do want to raise a yellow flag of caution here, because just because you guys make great friends does not mean that you will make great roommates, right? So keep that in mind. Like if you keep different hours, for example, or if you have different interests and hobbies, or if you have different ideas on how to run a household, any of these things can lead to some friction. So you just want to proceed with caution, and also consider whether or not there are other groups that might be a better fit, like family, for example. If you have relatives in town that can likewise benefit from a roommate situation, maybe that's a good option for you. A pre-existing group may work. And by pre-existing group, I mean an already established roommate situation where one of the members is maybe graduating or moving out of town, or, for whatever reason they're leaving and they are looking for somebody to fill that space. So that could be mutually beneficial for all parties if you should be able to find a situation like that. Also, you may want to consider subleasing if you can find, a deal like that. For those who don't know, subleasing is when the original tenant is going to be absent from that apartment for a short period of time. Maybe they got an internship in another city and they'll be gone for a couple months, or maybe they're going home for the summer, something like that, and they just need somebody to cover the rent while they're gone. If you likewise are looking for a short-term stay, again, that could be mutually beneficial. Now, in the sublease situation, the original tenant will remain on the lease, even though you're going to move in and pay their rent to them so they can pay the landlord. And because they are the ones on the lease, they are the ones that are liable for lease violations, late payments, damage to the unit, anything like that. So essentially, you're looking at kind of like a middleman here, like a a mini landlord situation where they're over you, but then they will answer to the actual property manager. If you can find a situation like that, again, you may want to proceed with some caution here because not a lot of complexes in Houston, particularly the ones that are bigger and professionally managed, will allow a sublease. So before you enter into an agreement, just make sure you get the proper written approvals from either that landlord or the property manager. All right, so let's say you've decided that you are going to take on a roommate and you know who that person is. Now let's talk a little bit about how to make the whole situation work. One thing that I always recommend in every roommate scenario, no matter who it is a roommate agreement because it does help to set expectations, avoid conflicts, and just creates a mutual understanding so that you guys are on one accord and on the same page before you even sign that lease, collect those keys, and move those boxes in. All right, so some topics that you may want to include in your agreement would be rent and bills. So who's going to pay what? When are they going to pay it and how? Like by what means will they be making the payments? Cleaning schedule, who's going to be responsible for cleaning what and with what frequency, how often are they cleaning those things. Talk about visitors as well. Are visitors allowed to the apartment? Are overnight visitors allowed to the apartment? If so, how long can they stay? And do either of you require notice before the visitors come over? So just a few things to think through. Quiet hours is another big one, right? Because you want to put some parameters around how much noise you guys can tolerate and when you're prepared to tolerate it. So, for example, how do you feel about the TV volume or any music or parties? Are the quiet hours different if it's a weekday versus the weekend? If it's daytime versus nighttime, you just want to talk through those things to see what everyone is comfortable with. You also want to review your move out terms because things happen. And if somebody needs to move out early, you need to discuss what that scenario would look like for you. For example, how are you going to divvy up that security deposit? Who's responsible for collecting it and making sure everybody gets their appropriate share? Or what if you guys share some furniture? Like who gets to keep what? And at what point does the person moving out get to collect things if they're going to be doing that? So just talk through those things as well as conflict resolution. Decide right up front how you want to mediate and handle any conflicts before you guys enter into any sort of binding agreement, right? So what you're going to do is tailor this list to fit your specific needs. And a good way to go about it is to Google a free template so that way it's really easy to kind of put together and get started and hopefully makes it a little bit of a seamless process for you and the roommate. All right, moving right along. Now we're ready to jump into our housing options because there are a spectrum of options out there. So you want to consider those things so that you're able to pick the one that's right for you. And we're going to start today with fully furnished units, which will offer you more support if you feel like that's what you need. Now here, you don't have to worry about bringing in your own furniture because they typically have everything there for you. And generally speaking, they also include all of your utilities. So if you can find a fully furnished unit or a fully furnished room, that might be a good fit for you if you need a little more support. Also, conventional apartments, which is what usually comes to mind when you're thinking off-campus living. And that's what we're going to be focused on today for the remainder of the presentation is how to get into an apartment. Lastly, we have traditional home rentals. Okay, so if you're wanting a little bit more space, maybe a yard and that sort of thing, then you may want to look at private rentals. Now, keep in mind that for a private rental, the process could potentially be just a little bit slower because we're not talking about a leasing office anymore or business hours. You're going to be searching for a home in the way that a home buyer would, right? You're going to be scheduling those tours and you're going to be subject to the availability of the landlord and or a current tenant if they already have someone living there. the landlord or their representative, if they have one, will also facilitate the application process. So the processing time may vary. So you just want to keep those things in mind ahead of your search. Alrighty. So we've discussed where you want to live and who you want to live with, if anyone at all. So now the next question we need to answer is, what can you afford? All right, so let's break that down. We're going to talk about budget, rent, and financial aid so that you can get an overall picture of the total financials involved of obtaining an apartment. Right? So let's start with budget. Okay, so when you're planning ahead and trying to figure out how much money you need to put aside in order to afford a unit, you need to include money for an application fee or an app fee as it is commonly referred. Now, your app fee covers processing of your application, background checks, credit checks, and sometimes they will also verify your employment as well. And they're going to investigate those things just to ensure that you meet their income and background requirements before they actually offer you a lease. Right? And that's going to run you about $50 to $100 per applicant. And generally speaking, it's a non-refundable fee. Even if you're denied the apartment, if you're not approved, the fee is usually still non-refundable. You also want to set aside money for your administrative fee, also known as an admin fee. All right, so that one is going to help the leasing office cover the administrative costs associated with processing new tenants. So everything from handling your paperwork, preparing the lease, setting up your tenant account, and just other move-in coordination. Typically, that's going to cost about $100 per application. So not per applicant, per application. All right. Again, the exact pricing of all of this will vary just depending on the building that we're talking about. And some places don't charge the admin fee at all. Like they'll waive some of this stuff for you. But if they do charge it, it is typically non-refundable. Right? And then lastly, you want to set aside some funds for a security deposit. So the security deposit is financial protection for the landlord in case of unpaid rent or damage to the unit, damage beyond normal wear and tear. Okay, usually it's equal to 1 month's rent, but it could potentially be lower or higher than that, just depending on the results of your credit check and your rental history. Some other costs that you're going to want to keep in mind is renter's insurance, which I highly recommend whether the property is requiring it or not. It just is a good idea to cover yourself in case of any accidents or incidences that could occur. You also want to have some money for moving expenses. So if you'll need a van or movers, supplies like your boxes, tape, scissors, that little bubble wrap, whatever you need, you want to have some money set aside to cover that. Once you've moved, you will also need to pay for your utilities like electricity or internet, assuming they are not included in the rent wherever you decide to move. Keep in mind also that utilities sometimes have a startup or origination fee as well, in addition to, whatever you're going to pay monthly to maintain that service. So you just want to be prepared for that just in case. You also want to be prepared to cover all of your food and your toiletries because, you need to eat, and you also need supplies to run your household. So make sure that's included in your budget. You also want to have money for your school costs. So don't forget that. Textbooks, other materials, whatever you need, have those funds set aside. And then lastly, of course, you want to have money set aside for a rainy day if you can. So just being able to cover miscellaneous expenses as they occur. A budget calculator might be useful so that you can track like your fixed expenses versus the flexible ones and get an idea of, how to structure everything ahead of that apartment search. So feel free to Google one of those as well if you like. Okay, so that was a lot. Let's take just a beat. We're going to review something that's a little bit simpler in nature, but just as important. Okay, I want to talk about the rent. Because when you're shopping online, the amount that's shown more often than not is not the full monthly price that you will pay. The amount that is shown is usually what we call base rent. So that's just the starting point of what you're going to pay each month. You need to add to that any mandatory or required fees that come from the apartment complex, plus any optional fees that you're just choosing to take on from the apartment complex. So the total of those three things will give you the true monthly payment that you should expect to make every month, okay? And I did grab a screenshot from a property that I've worked with a few times because they list their additional fees right on the website. And I thought it would be good if we could take a look together just so you have an idea of what to expect. And as you can see, right up top, admin fee, application fee, and security deposit. Okay, and on the far right, you can see those things are required. Next, they have what they call essentials, also required here. So these are not things that you can pick and choose what you'll pay. These are all things you would be responsible for if you enter into a lease agreement with them. Right. Next, we have our optional fees. So here, and they describe it here as personalized add-ons, but still, if you look on the far right column, you see all of this is optional. So for example, if you prefer to have your own reserved parking space at this complex rather than just fend for yourself among the open spaces, then you can pay a monthly fee to secure that. If you have a pet, this should come up, pretty much anywhere you're looking. They usually require some sort of like pet deposit and pet rent and possibly other fees. So you want to keep that in mind. Here, they're also offering the service of reporting your monthly payments to the credit bureau so that it can impact your credit score. So that's available with this particular apartment, as well as storage rental space. So if your unit doesn't have enough storage for all your belongings, it sounds like they have some different size units, storage units on property that you could rent for an additional price. But again, all those things are optional. All right. So now let's look at some potential fees, what they're calling here situational fees. These are things that will only be charged to you should they occur. You see on the far right, per occurrence. So everything from terminating your lease early to late fees for the rent, paying your rent late if you get evicted. Maybe you don't renew your lease, but you still live there. If you go month to month, there's a month to month fee here. Returned payment fee, so if there's insufficient funds when you make your payment, and all sorts of things. But again, only as they occur. So not something that I typically would include in a budget, but it's good to be aware of just in case. All right, that takes us to financial aid, because I do know that a lot of students are relying on a financial aid award to help fund their housing costs. So the first question we want to answer is, will apartment complexes recognize your financial aid as income? And the answer is not all complexes will. So if you're relying on a financial aid award to help fund, where you're living, you want to have that conversation pretty early on, just so you know you're dealing with somebody who's able to work with you, right? And if they are able to work with you, typically what they're wanting from you in terms of verification is an award letter, like a really detailed, almost itemized type of award letter, so they can see exactly how much money has been allocated towards your housing. So they know then how much they can, count towards that income requirement. Okay. They will also want that letter to be official, right? They need something that came from the university that has not been edited or altered in any way. And most places that I've worked with in the past will try to check for that sort of thing. So do keep that in mind as well. If you find that what has been awarded to you is under what the cost of that rental is, then there are a few ways, like I mentioned before, there are a few additional ways to make up that shortfall. So that might include possibly getting a part-time job or a full-time job, just depending on what you have the capacity to commit to. Maybe they might consider a cosigner. So someone who says, hey, if this person is unable to make their rent, I will pay the rent on their behalf. So sometimes they'll consider a cosigner to help you get approved. Roommates, right? Additional roommates to help bump up the money counting towards the income requirement, like we discussed before. Sometimes you are able to pay a higher deposit, so kind of like a collateral situation to make that landlord or property manager feel more secure. And if none of those things are an option, then you can always change up where you're shopping, like what neighborhood you're shopping in, or what type of rental option you're considering. So, for example, if you were looking for a 2 bedroom, maybe now you're looking for a 1 bedroom, or maybe now you're looking for a studio. So doing those things could potentially help control the cost and make it a bit more affordable for you. But what if you're not using an allocated like housing award, but rather you're going to rely on a refund to help cover the costs of your housing? Now, for anyone who may not know, a refund is going to be the leftover monies after your tuition and fees are paid. Okay, so if you're relying on the refund, the first thing you're going to want to do is confirm, that you're receiving one, right? Because if the bulk of your financial aid or all of it, if has been used to cover tuition and fees, then there may not be enough there to adequately cover your housing expenses. So you want to confirm that up front. Am I even receiving a refund? And if so, what's the number that I'm looking at? You also want to check the disbursement schedule, because it's one thing to have money coming, and it's another thing to have money in your hand, right? You don't want to start shopping before you have funds in hand. Excuse me. So make sure you understand that schedule and when you can expect it, so you can align so you can plan accordingly for like when you want to get out there and start looking. You're also going to want to sign up for direct deposit. Not sure if that's automatic these days, but I know previously it was something you actually had to sign up for, or, request and say, hey, I want you to deposit the funds electronically into this particular account or what have you. So you want to research that, make sure it's set up so that you can receive those funds as quickly and as seamlessly as possible. Right? And then lastly, you're going to want to allocate any funds that you receive responsibly, because you cannot spend money on housing if you have spent that money on other things. Okay, so make sure you're being responsible and putting that money towards the budget, like we talked about on the previous slide. So that way you're set up for success, or, at least as best as you can. All right, moving right along. So now we are going to dive into locations, okay? Because it is important to identify what's important to you in the area or the neighborhood where you're going to be living. So that way you can focus on the places that make the most sense for you, that are in alignment for what you would want out of a neighborhood. So start by asking yourself some questions, okay? Do you want to live close to the school? That's one question. Do you want to live close to your job if you're working? Or maybe you want to live close to like an internship or other places that you visit very frequently. So maybe that's not so close to the school, but it still suits you because that's a place you go all the time. Are there family and friends in town that you prefer to be nearby? Or are you a more social person? Okay, do you prefer to be around like bars and restaurants and shopping centers and movie theaters and all that sort of thing? Knowing what you want really helps when it comes to narrowing down those different neighborhood options. I'd love to take a minute to review, just as an example, some neighborhoods that are near UHD. So that way you just have an idea of what's out there in terms of a newer building. Okay, so something that was maybe built within the last 3 to 5 years. First up, I have listed downtown Houston because that's going to be closest to UHD. So there are lots of high rises in downtown, lots of luxury amenities. You might get those, skyline views and all of that. But keep in mind that area can also be the most expensive. So, you'll want to factor in budget before deciding that that's the place for you. Also, East Downtown, which is more commonly referred to as Edo, that's a trendy, more like a fast growing area. They have a lot of modern apartments and a lot of walkable amenities and a very nice emerging food scene. So maybe just a tad bit more affordable than, in the heart of downtown. If you look at the Heights or the Greater Heights neighborhood, that's going to be a little bit farther from campus, but it's nice. It's full of charm, so you may want to consider it anyway. They offer a lot of various types of housing, so apartments, townhomes, and private rentals sometimes. And they definitely have a mix of modern and historic vibes. So definitely something to look at if you don't mind, commuting just a little bit further. And then lastly, I've listed Midtown, which is a very fun neighborhood known for its nightlife. Okay, so here you can look forward to walkability and again, lots of modern apartments and amenities. It tends to be quite popular with students and young professionals. So one last thing I want to note here is that I've listed some figures for each neighborhood. However, these are just ballpark estimates. It's possible that you might find units that are more or less expensive in any of these areas, but at least you have an idea of what to expect, okay? Just note that actual rates will depend on the building that we're talking about and also current market trends. So once you've decided where it is that you would like to live, I'd love you guys to keep some safety tips in mind because crime rates are going to vary by different factors like population density, time of day, and nearby activity. No area is 100% free of crime, or else we'd all live there, right? So no area is 100% free of crime. But if you do your due diligence, if you do your research, you can find areas and neighborhoods that you feel the most comfortable occupying. So I did put down a few tips that I thought you might find useful, again, no matter where you land. Starting with securing your home, okay? So you want to always lock your doors and windows, and please avoid propping open exterior doors because that can pose a safety risk. You also want to protect your vehicle by not leaving valuables at all if you can help it, but if there are some, not in plain sight. You also want to park in well lit and secure areas whenever it is possible to do so. You want to stay safe when walking alone. So if you can help it, try not to walk alone. Try to walk in groups because there is safety in numbers, but sometimes you can't help it. Necessity requires that you be on your own, which is totally fine, but you just want to be aware. So prioritize the safest route over the fastest route. You want to stick to well-lit areas. You want to use your sidewalks and your crosswalks. And you want to stay aware of your surroundings at all times. So don't be on your phone, not texting, not on a phone call. Just you want to stay aware so that you can react to anything that may happen while you're on the move. Let's also keep others informed of our whereabouts, okay? So that means maybe letting friends, family, roommates know where you're going and when you plan to be back. So that way they're on the lookout for you. And if you don't arrive and they suspect something happened, they're on alert. They're calling around, they're looking for you, they're calling the authorities if that feels appropriate. But they can only do that if you've given them kind of a heads up about what to expect. You may also want to share your location with someone or use like a safety travel app, for the whole roommate group or a family group so that everybody can more easily keep tabs on each other. Lastly, I did want to include that you do have some safety resources available to you on campus as well, particularly UHD PD. They do offer a 24-hour escort service, and to request that, you can either go into their department directly. You can use one of the call boxes, which I believe are at the building entrances and in elevators. And then also you can call their non-emergency line to request an escort. So that line is 713-221-8255. 8065. So again, for anybody needing to utilize UHDPD's non-emergency line, maybe save it in your phone, right? So you can access it quickly if you ever need to. It's 713-221-8065. All right. So now that we've, figured out our roommate situation, our housing options, we talked financials, we picked a neighborhood, we're feeling safe in that neighborhood. Let's move on now to a couple of tips that I think you might find useful as you prepare for that apartment search. The first one is going to be timeline. Like, when should you start your search? Ideally, you're going to want to begin 30 to 60 days prior to your move-in date. And there are a few reasons why this timing tends to work out well. The first being it correlates with when apartment complexes are typically requiring their tenants to give notice. So if someone decides, okay, I'm not going to be renewing my lease, they don't have to tell them until 30 to 60 days before that lease is up. And if you start shopping prior to this window, they may not have an accurate sense of what availability they have. Okay, they can't accurately say, yes, we will have something for you at the time that you want to come, or no, we won't. You have a better shot at that if you just wait for this 30 to 60 day window. Also, the perks, you get better specials and incentives if you wait till a little bit closer to your move-in date. And the reason being is that there's lots of competition right now. It's lots of, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but it's lots of apartment buildings going up all the time. And so everybody is competing for your business. They want to incentivize you to rent with them. So it's lots of deals and specials. But they want to prioritize filling vacancies immediately and quickly. So the closer you are to that move-in date, the better shot you have at securing some really good deals and specials. So that's just another reason why you may want to wait just a little bit. Don't plan too far in advance. And then lastly, it just gives you an adequate amount of time to prepare. So if you can start preparing prior to this window, that would be good. But at the very least, within that 30 to 60 days, it gives you a chance to save up the monies we talked about, do the research around the areas, roommates, all the things that we discussed, as well as gathering any relevant documents you think might be necessary for the application process. So just gives you a little bit of time to get everything together. Alrighty, let's go on now to another tip that I was really eager to share with you guys today because I believe it's really crucial in making sure that your apartment search experience is a good one. And that's how to manage your expectations. Okay, so let's start with the market. And here's what I want to say about that. The market is what it is. Okay, you cannot get $1 million mansion for a $5 budget. Okay, now let me explain a little bit more what I mean by that. You may have in mind a particular neighborhood or a particular building, particular amenities, et cetera, but all those things collectively affect how much it will cost you to live there. Okay, so if you're not happy with the options that you have within a particular search that you're conducting, what are you prepared to adjust? What are you prepared to flex on to improve those options? Will you choose a different location? Maybe you don't want to live in a brand new building. Maybe you're okay with something that's a little bit older. Maybe you can relax on the amenities a little bit. That's an internal question you ask yourself and then answer yourself, okay? Because flexibility is going to be key because that market is not going to bend to accommodate you. You have to bend a little bit to accommodate what's available. Okay, the other option though is to not make any changes to your wish list. You can absolutely pursue exactly what it is that you want. And as an apartment locator, that's always my number one goal, is to try to get you the place that you want in the neighborhood that you want for the price that you want. I always aim for the stars. I always go for it. But we just have to keep in mind that unless you have a pretty hefty budget, some flexibility may be in order. And if you don't want to flex, that's totally fine. But then we're looking at just accepting the options that are in front of you and making the best of those options that we can. Okay. All right. Now I want to make a quick note about specials. Specials are really awesome. Right now, I'm seeing some as good as 8 weeks free. So like for the first 2 months, you don't have to pay, or sometimes they let you prorate it, like you prorate that savings over the course of your lease so that your monthly payments are lower. But yeah, I've seen as much as 8 weeks free, and they're giving away gift cards for like $500, $1,000. Like it's some really good deals out there right now. But there is a catch. Okay. And the catch is they want a longer lease term with you. Okay, so if you're someone who doesn't mind signing a 13-month lease or a 15-month lease, or maybe potentially more, it varies, it's situational, depends on the building. But if you're okay with signing a longer lease, then great. These specials will be right up your alley, and they should make a big difference in terms of like how it impacts your financials. If you are not open to signing a longer lease, that's okay too. You want to stick to a 12-month lease or less, totally fine. But just keep in mind that you may not have the same incentives and deals available to you as someone who signs that longer lease. Okay. And then lastly, I really want to touch on what it means to find your perfect match. Okay. I compare it to what it might be like to be dating someone, right? You have this wish list, this, checkbox of things that you want. I want 10 out of 10, all these things, right? And that's totally fine to have. And that's great. Like I said, we can shoot for the stars, we can go for it. But unless you have a really hefty budget, there may be a chance that we can't find every single thing on the list, right? Now, are you prepared to turn your back on something that is checking, 8 boxes out of 10, 9 boxes out of 10, because you're holding out for 10 out of 10? Now, that is a situational kind of rhetorical question, because sometimes it may make sense to hold out until we find it, but other times it may make sense to say, okay, well, we got 7, 8, 9 out of 10. That's going to be good enough for me. Unless you're willing to flex, like we talked about before, then maybe we have a better shot at making you, even happier with the options that we can present. So don't focus on the perfect place so much. Focus on the perfect place for you. What's going to work best for you under the circumstances, right? And I did put together a visual representation just because I wanted to really drive home this point of what it means to flex a little bit or adjust a little bit. So think about it this way. The perfect scenario is that we nail all three of the items you see here: cost, location, amenities. We nail 3 out of 3. We get them all done. We found that perfect place, that unicorn, okay? It does happen. So yay for us. Kudos to us if we can get it done. But what you should mentally be prepared to do going into the search is finding only 2 out of 3. So if the price is right and the location is perfect, perhaps the amenities may not be up to the standard that you hoped for. Or if the cost checks out and the amenities are great, perhaps the location is not quite what you had in mind. Okay. And then lastly, if you find a great location and the amenities are just everything you ever dreamed, maybe the cost at that point is a little bit outside of your budget. So just be ready to adapt if you need to. And my hope is that that makes the process a little less frustrating and a lot more exciting, and just everything more seamless and smooth, as you're transitioning into that off-campus housing situation. All right. Now we're ready for just a couple of resources, starting with me, an apartment locator. So if you decide that you don't want to facilitate the search on your own and you'd like the support of someone like myself, I did want to talk you through what that process looks like and really what you're getting out of it. The first step in the process when working with me specifically is a virtual meeting. So I usually hop on Zoom with folks so we can talk through specifically what you need in a place, what you want, what your desires are, where you want to live, all your preferences, all the things I should keep in mind. After that, I do the research, I make the phone calls, I do the vetting, and I curate a list that's specific to what you and I discussed. Okay, I email that list over to you for your consideration, and then if you want more options after that, I'll send more options after that. It's kind of a revolving door of communication until you're ready to pick a place. And a part of that communication is saying, hey, I really like this place and that place. Can you set up some tours for me? I will absolutely do that. Get you out on some tours. Once you finally found the perfect place for you, the next step would be to apply, hopefully get approved so you can sign your lease and move in. Now, the biggest benefit to the arrangement is that it comes at no cost to you. That's right. My services are completely free to my renters because I'm compensated by the apartment complex after you move in, right? You also have the benefit of more insights on deals and specials because I have access to a database that kind of ties me into the greater Houston area so I can see pretty much all of what's going on out there and can, keep that in mind when I'm doing my search for you. And then lastly, it's just a faster, more stress-free way to conduct your apartment search because, like I said, I'm the one that's out there kind of in the weeds, in the details, putting everything together for you so that you can focus on school and work and just life in general. And then, of course, you also have the Basic Needs Center. If you are looking for additional support with food security, financial or transportation assistance, as well as emergency housing situations. So you want to connect with and engage with the UHD Basic Needs Center so that way, if ever you find yourself in need of more support or more help, you're able to connect with them directly. You can also connect with me on Instagram. If you enjoyed our talk today, you can find me at Monique Moves Houston. I'd love to connect and engage and keep the conversation going. And then lastly, of course, just to wrap us up here, if you are interested in working with me as your apartment locator, I'd be happy to help out. Feel free to scan the QR code here on the screen. That's going to take you to a form that's managed by UHD Basic Needs. They will collect some relevant information from you and then forward that to me so I can reach out and see how I can be of service. I want to thank everybody for attending our Renting 101 workshop today. It's been my absolute pleasure to share some details with you. And with that, I will turn it back over to Cynthia to see if we have any questions or comments.
Okay, so I'm going to unmute everyone. And since we have so few people here, I mean, that's a good thing though. So we have personal attention. So if anybody, or if you're shy, we can go to the chat box and let everybody, ask their questions there. But either way, we're going to take some questions if you want to do that. Let me just unmute everybody real quick. I'm going to allow y'all to unmute if y'all want to unmute,
And
or you can go ahead.
Oh, sorry about that, Cynthia. I do see one question that got dropped in the chat there. So I'm not sure at what point you joined the presentation, but I did have a
Wait a minute. Okay, yes. Okay, we lost you there, Monique.
Sorry, I was muted. I'm
Yeah.
not sure how much of that you heard, so forgive me if this is redundant, but I'm looking at the question in the first question there in the chat, and I'm not sure at what point you joined the workshop. So, but I did have a slide on neighborhood safety. Okay, so it will be posted for you guys. Cynthia will get that up for you guys to access if you need to go back and review it. But I did share some safety tips and things to keep in mind, and just feel free to do your research, do your due diligence, because as I mentioned before, there's no area that's 100% free of crime. So the best we can do is to really look into things before we settle somewhere so that you can feel as comfortable as possible with the choice that you made.
Does anybody have any questions?
No questions. I just want to thank us, Monique and Cynthia for having us. Thank you.
Sure, no
Have a
problem.
good day.
Thanks for joining us.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just want to reiterate that I have used an apartment locator in the past. And so, because I moved from a house into an apartment, and it was really nice to have somebody, and they do know all the specials. I'm telling you, they have access to things that were not on the website, they were not listed anywhere. I would have not gotten access to specials, like she said, like 2 months free